Taneytown Planning Commission please come to order? Would you please stand for the pledge to the flag? George, would you lead?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I'd like to welcome everyone here this evening to this meeting. Let the records reflect the members that are present. Commission members should have received the draft minutes of March 25th, 2019. Is there any correction or additions to those minutes?
No, sir.
Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion.
So moved.
I'll second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor of approval of the draft minutes, March 25th, 2019, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Carried. Thank you. Delegations and action items tonight, Taneytown Crossing, presentation of a concept plan, requesting concept approval. Jim, would you lead us off on that, please?
Sure. You may recall having seen the Taneytown Crossing several months ago. Let's see, they were here in the fall prior to their Board of Appeals hearing because the semi-detached and apartment dwellings are considered special exceptions in the district. So the Board of Zoning Appeals did grant the special exceptions for the reduced number of parking spaces and the semi-detached dwelling type as well as the apartment dwelling types. So here we are, the special exceptions granted, so the project can move forward now. So even though you've seen the concept and some elevation renderings already, we're kind of starting the process over again from the concept stage now that they've received the special exceptions that were required. So I know they've got quite a delegation here. I'm not sure who's going to start things off. So
Good evening, Kelly Schaefer. I'm here representing the developer and the applicant. As Mr. Wieprecht just introduced, this did come before you before we came to the BZA hearing. Nothing since then has changed about the site specifically. It's my understanding, and Mr. Wieprecht and Mr. Gallo can jump in if I'm incorrect, that tonight we are requesting just the concept approval so that we may submit our plans for then staff to comment upon them and then to proceed through the entire review process before this commission and on to a final site plan review. So we understand that this is the beginning of the review process and allows us to kind of get our foot in the door and get started. We do have a crew with us. I have Mr. Paxson here, who's a representative of the developer, Mr. Dribbin, who is a representative of the traffic consulting group, Mr. Hackett, who's here with CLSI, and then Mr. Blake, who's here from the architect firm that has been handling this. If you'll recall, when we came before you, before we came to the BZA, we showed you some drawings and some sketches. We have those same ones here with us this evening in case there are any lingering questions that were not initially addressed at that point, and that's why we have everybody here so that they can answer any specific questions that you might have at this point in time. Again, understanding that much more specific questions will come up throughout the entire review process of this project. I did note that in your code there is a process to allow for a waiver from preliminary if you're not subdividing the land and go straight to final. So we would request that waiver since we are not subdividing the property, and so that we can start the review process and proceed forward to the final site plan review. Okay. That being said, we're here with it for any questions.
Okay, let's start off. Anyone here from the questions? Ollie, you had some, so let's start off.
Yeah, you've had a waiver on the parking because the parking is very not adequate.
Well,
Jim?
should I let?
there was a Testimony was provided at the Board of Appeals
I don't think the
hearing,
DA says
indicating that the project was,
I don't think we're... I was leaning forward before you were talking.
Yeah, it's on.
We're good.
All right.
Good.
We can hear.
Is there any reason we need to have her repeat? I don't-
No,
I think
We
we
good?
caught the bulk of it.
she was hard to hear.
we heard everything she said.
All right. I'll just start with your questions. About the parking.
I think we're good.
Has
we're
anybody
good.
gave the thought to the fact that in a development like this, we're going to have at least 2 working people with 2 cars? Where's the company? Where's anything else going to sit? There's no excess parking nowhere. There's just what you have to have, nothing else.
So Jim, you're saying they meet the requirement? Is that what you said?
Well,
The
you're
requirements
saying
has
in
always been
BZA
more than
Board of
that.
Appeals granted the special exception to reduce the number.
Okay.
So we're not,
Where are we
So
tied to that decision, though, are we?
well, we can certainly request that the preliminary plan, that they explore providing additional parking. As I said, the board did grant the special exception to reduce the number of spaces, though. I do not have the case decision in front of me to speak in more detail about it, since we're just at the concept stage right now.
I mean, what happened is they granted the request that was sought in the application. So they didn't get into the specifics of the numbers. They just said this is what was requested, and they granted that. So that means they don't have to comply with the calculations in the code, that this would be okay to meet the use requirements in the code. But you're still free to do what you need to do to review it, just as if you were looking at on-street parking in a development. You can say that we feel that you need to look at this or look at that.
And
The
ju-
traffic engineer, right?
Yes, yes.
Did you have a comment you want to make to that?
I-
My comment was, I'm Jeff Paxton, I'm one of the owners. Can you guys hear me?
Well, you step up to the microphone.
Come to, yeah.
Hi, I'm, hold on, if I can get that.
We can hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
I'm Jeff Paxton, I'm one of the owners, I'm with Pax Edwards. And my development company, we own over 20 of these communities, mainly in Maryland. And we typically design these things for roughly 2 spaces per unit, and we're finding that we really have never had a parking issue. You know, our average is about 1.5 cars per apartment, and that's been sufficient. So just
Yeah, I'm going to jump in on that too also, because Nick Durbin, who is here and can speak if you'd like him to, part of the BZA's decision was based upon testimony from him and a section in his traffic study that addressed the parking needs. And so they did hear testimony on the parking and did consider that in their decision as well, in addition to what Mr. Paxton just said.
To the chair, can we hear his testimony?
Yes.
Good evening, Nick Durbin with Lenhart Traffic Consulting. We prepared a traffic impact study as well as a parking evaluation for the site. The parking evaluation was based on the Institute for Transportation Engineers Parking Generation Manual, and that's a nationally recognized document where they've gone out and studied sites across the country based on the land use. So it could be anything from a hotel to a residential development like this. And they look at each of these sites how many, when people are parked and what the peak parking is. So for this type of site, single family residential units, the peak parking occurs overnight. Obviously that's when people are home from work, and so between 11 p.m. and 6 a.m. is peak parking based on the ITE parking generation manual. And Based on the studies, they provide an equation for what that peak parking is in a typical development. To get into the details, the peak parking for a development like this is 1.26 spaces times the number of units plus 9, which gives us, in this case, 36 units, results in a peak parking demand of 55 spaces for a typical development of this nature. The developer is proposing 72 spaces on this site, so based on that analysis, we conclude that there is adequate parking based on the national standard that would typically be used to evaluate this.
All right.
The
Thank you.
72 places isn't for parking. It's only 68 because 4 of them are the dog parks. So you're losing 4 spaces, so you can't even add that. No way.
Well, they can walk
Well,
across the lot to those units. I mean,
But that's the dog park. That's-
Even so, the peak parking demand per the manual is 55 spaces. So whether it's 68 or 72, that would indicate that there's adequate parking.
I
on the
know there's
site.
a lot of inconvenience in this development.
Well, actually, from 11 p.m. to in the morning, it's not going to be a whole lot of dog walking.
valid
Sir,
point.
question, are the parking spaces numbered? Are they reserved in any of these spaces?
I'll jump in there. This property, I'm glad you asked that question because that brings up an important point and something that was raised before the BZA hearing. This property is property managed. So as part of that process, they will evaluate the parking, and if it becomes an issue, and Mr. Paxton can jump in here if I'm not stating this correctly, but they do have control over that under the leases. So if that ever becomes an issue in any of their developments, they can do that and reserve them specifically for units and take care of that issue.
So then those who are visiting, let's say someone, they're moving in, they want to have people come visit, and they have, 4 extra cars come in, where are they going to park? Westview can't handle parking along the road. And that's one of my biggest concerns. There's already people parking up closer around the turn. It can't be handled down here, and that's something that needs to be avoided and addressed.
The first one? Okay. I believe, and Mr. Hackett was also present with us at these meetings, that there was discussion both by this commission and also the BZA about the developer putting up no parking signs on Westview to eliminate the potential of parking on there, and they are completely willing and able to do that. In addition to the visitor parking, that could also be something that could be regulated as necessary by the property management in terms of marking specific designated spaces and those sorts of control tactics.
Okay.
How many handicap spaces are there right here?
Yeah, it's about parking.
Do you know how many handicapped?
What was the question, Jim?
How many handicap spaces do they have?
I believe there's 4. 3 or 4. Three.
I see 3.
I'd like to ask a question also. Will the community building require parking?
The community building will be to service this community. It will not be open to the general public. So theoretically, it will be the same members that are the residents at the community that are utilizing that community building.
Well, people will have to drive there, right?
Right. Well, I mean,
No, it's walking distance
they will
from
drive
everywhere.
to their residential unit, and then they will utilize the community building.
Right.
So it will be
I mean, it really is in walking distance,
Right.
even from the farthest point.
right.
Any other questions with reference to parking?
Well, while we had him talking about parking, can we also talk about the traffic survey at the same time? Because I'm really curious the impact that you foresee on the intersection of Harney Road and West Baltimore Street.
Sure. So, as I noted, we conducted a full traffic impact study for the area in coordination with State Highway meeting their standards as well as the town standards. Kind of walking through typical traffic impact study that was conducted here. We collected existing turning movement counts at 5 intersections, including 140 at Harney Road, 194 at 140, Harney at Westview, as well as several of the smaller intersections along Westview. So those turning movement counts are collected during the typical peak periods during the morning and evening. So we look at 6 to 9 a.m. and 4 to 7 p.m. And we're looking for the single highest hour during each one of those periods. That's what we evaluate as part of the traffic study. So we look at the existing peak period. We look at three things: existing peak period, what we call the background condition, which is the existing plus some regional growth. In this case, we assumed 3% over 2 years, which is actually conservative compared to what growth has actually occurred along 140 and 194, as well as known developments in the area. So Meads Crossing was included, traffic from Meads Crossing. So existing, background, and then what we call total, which is those two conditions with the site traffic added to them. The finding of our traffic study was that all of the study intersections operate acceptably under both SHA and Taneytown standards. That would be a level service C or better. Level service is the same, for those that may not know, is the same as school grades. So an A is the best level service. Depending on the jurisdiction, a C or a D is usually the cutoff of acceptable. And then E and F are generally always considered unacceptable. In specific to this development, a level service C is the requirement for roads that are maintained by the state, and roads that are town roads are level service A or B requirement. So in this case, 194 and 140 are operating at a level service C under both the background and total conditions. 140 and Harney Road, the southbound approach, so coming off of Harney Road, is operating at a level service C under background and total conditions. And each of the other intersections is operating at level service A. But as I noted, all of those do meet the standards for adequacy. And I guess I would also note that the development in this case generates a very small number of trips. So I mentioned before with the parking, there's the ITE parking generation manual. There's a similar manual that the ITE, Institute for Transportation Engineers, has developed for trip generation. So again, any type of site, whether it's fast food, hotel, residential, anything you could think of, there's trip generation rates that are based on studies throughout the country. And so for this type of development, again, based on 36 units, the total amount of traffic that would be projected from the site is 18 a.m. peak hour morning trips. So that's just during the single highest hour of traffic during the morning, and 24 p.m. peak hour trips. Now, those are not all in one direction, so some of them are going into the site, some of them are coming out. Obviously, in the morning with residential, more is coming out. In the evening, more is going in. But those volumes, in relation to the volumes at the existing intersections along 140 and 194, are really a drop in the bucket compared to what's out there today. So the finding of the study was generally that the development's impact was negligible on the surrounding intersections.
Do you have a lot of those numbers there in front of you?
I do. I have the study with me.
Okay, I'd be curious, are you able to tell me the number of the current impact of Harney Road and 140? How do you have that broken down in trips? How many cars that go through? How many turn each direction?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I have all those volumes. I guess. So along 140 in both directions total, during the peak hours, there's roughly 600 vehicles. And in the AM peak hour, so coming southbound out of Harney Road, you have about 150, and then 75 coming out of Harney in the PM peak hour.
Okay.
And we would be adding, as I noted, about roughly 10 to 15 cars to that movement.
Okay.
Is this through the week or weekends?
This is through the week. So the guidelines for traffic impact studies, especially for residential uses, typically only look at the AM and PM peak hours on a typical weekday. If it were something like a convenience store, we might include a Saturday because that's going to have a very heavy Saturday trip generation. But the residential trip generation characteristics are really focused around the morning and evening peaks when people are coming from and going to work on a typical weekday.
What else about school?
How about schools?
Sure, and yes, so counts, there are very standard periods where we are required to conduct counts. The counts are conducted, turning movement counts are conducted while schools are in session, and for a weekday study, they have to be Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday counts. So we want to capture, Friday you may have higher traffic or lower traffic with people leaving for the weekends. We want to capture what would be considered a typical day. and then look at the worst periods within that typical day. So yeah, while schools are in session, not during summer months, not near a major holiday or event such as that.
Okay, so you mentioned, I guess because the intersection involves a state road, that the requirement is a level service C, is that correct?
That's correct. So the state's requirement is a level service D. The town requires a level service C for an adequacy finding.
Okay, I know it's not an exact science, so I'm kind of asking you to use some of your judgment on this and your experience. How many trips would it take to lower that level of service at this point?
So the levels of service, as we looked at them, are based on the highway. There are several different methodologies, but this is based on the highway capacity methodology, which is kind of the most standard methodology that's in use. And there are thresholds within that methodology for each of the levels of service. In this case, Harney Road, the southbound approach is and the thresholds are based on the average delay that a vehicle experiences.
Okay.
So in this case, the Harney Road southbound approach during a typical peak hour is about 20 seconds of delay. And I believe the threshold to go to a level service D is 30 seconds, if I'm not mistaken. I'm not 100% sure on that number, but we're not right at a threshold where a couple trips would tip it into the next level of service.
So it'd be closer to like a 50 or 60% increase in traffic for that to really dramatically change. Is that what I'm gathering?
I don't know that I would say that high, but certainly a significant increase.
Right. I mean,
in
right now
traffic.
you're at just over 10% increase in traffic, correct?
Right.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah, it would have to be much more. I mean, we're talking 100, maybe 100 trips, rough numbers, just kind of ballparking, but something much more substantial than what we're looking at here.
Okay. Thank you. I have no further questions for him.
Anybody else on traffic? Anything else? Anybody else have any questions? No, I'll entertain any questions.
I have a question. At the corner of Westview and Harney, there's houses there now. Are you going to remove some houses down there? On the corner?
Oops, sorry.
Leave one.
Yeah. Right, now there is a house right on the
There's
corner.
a corner. There's one on the corner of
Westview and Harney. Nope.
Westview and Harney.
There's
Westview and Harney.
one duplex, one semi-detached that's right on the corner of Westview and
Yeah.
Harney that this
You're going to
project
remove
will.
you're going to remove.
That will be removed. Okay. Right,
This one we have replaced with new construction. This one.
okay.
Okay. Any comments from the floor? Ma'am, come to the podium. State your name and address.
Lisa Crawford. I live at 61 West Baltimore Street, so I am very close to this road. My question is, in your studies, have you studied developments and traffic coming from Gettysburg and Emmitsburg and the developments that are going on in those areas that are also going to be increasing? Did you include that in your studies? Because I go to Gettysburg a lot, and I travel that road.
Yeah, please do. You're referring to the Harney Road then?
Yeah, so what I noted in my testimony, I apologize if it wasn't clear, but we did include a 3% growth annually over 2 years for the study. The average background growth that we calculated was actually less than 1%, so that's a very conservative estimate. And the purpose of including that growth in the study is to account for, we know specifically about Meads Crossing, but things like traffic from Gettysburg or surrounding areas that we may not know about the developments, that growth is kind of a catch-all for regional expansion of traffic.
I would also like to ask, how many times have you driven that road and pulled out during a busy period of time?
I did go out there and conduct peak period observations, so that was part of.
Like how many?
I was out there for the better part of 3 hours one day and drove around. But the study is based on national standards from ITE. We complied with everything from state highway, and it's all very standardized. This isn't kind of a make it up as you go scenario. It's all codified as to how you conduct these studies. So
I understand, but you don't live here. So I'm asking you how many times, so you've done it for a few hours.
that's correct. I was out there one day for several hours.
Okay, thank you.
The national standards don't equate to how busy Maryland often is. And if you live on Harney Road and you're pulling out, it can get a little tricky at times, and that's with the current traffic. As far as your parking spaces go, and living in town and living where I do, and it's kind of quiet on my end, really like it that way. If you go down towards the library where the current lower income housing is, there is nobody that has 1.5 cars. Everybody has 2 cars. So I'm very happy as far as how Mr. Glass addressed the parking issue. Even though it may have been approved by a previous committee, it is in no way adequate to what I currently see going on in my town and in my neighborhoods. And let's add snow removal to that. So national studies versus what goes on in a particular area or particular state, to me, is very different. And I know traffic, I don't know if this is a separate issue, but is working with the State Highway Department, is there plans for you guys to work with them to put a light there?
Closer seat for this. So as far as a traffic signal, there are 9 warrants that the state looks at that are, at least one of them is required to be met in order for a signal to be installed. The warrants range from looking at traffic volumes to whether you're in close proximity to a railroad crossing, to pedestrian volumes.
Just a simple yes or no. Is that something you want?
The answer is I don't believe that any of the warrants would be met at this location, and even if they were, State Highway would need to approve that since it's a state road. So that would be a State Highway jurisdiction that would require additional traffic analysis in order
Right,
to.
as we go through the process, they're gonna have to receive support from State Highway, and that's when they would recommend or require something along those lines.
And I would just note that our study was, the scope was coordinated with the State Highway, and that when I refer to national standards, those are the standards accepted by the State Highway Administration as well. So it's not, they are locally recognized and adopted as well.
If I could just make a statement, especially as far as parking. Some of this has to do with money and making money, not for the convenience of the citizens of the town. And pulling off of that road, more traffic, like I said, it's already hairy coming off that road. I've had a few incidences myself because visually, especially when you're if you're coming off that road and you're making a left, it does become, especially during high traffic volume times, and you're a rush hour in the morning and the evening, and including school buses, it does become a little tedious. So I would ask you all to consider that in whatever decisions you make.
Thank you. George?
I just want to make one comment. I'm thinking about Building A with 10 units in it. The people who are going to live in the farthest part of Building A carrying groceries from their car into their apartments or anything else, that's a pretty long jag there from parking to those units in Apartment A, Building A, 10 units. There's no parking at all in the front of that building for people to unload cars and so forth.
I just want to make sure we're looking at the right.
Upper left.
Right there. That's A.
I'm thinking about the people living in that furthest part of Building A and bringing groceries home, carrying children. There's only a
And you see them going from here to here,
there. Yes,
All parking right along.
right.
every rain.
Exactly, and the furthest part in that building, just think if you had to carry groceries from your car into that building.
About 70 feet.
Well, so that's a long ways.
Well, I think we're getting into preference of the people living there as opposed to something we can regulate.
Leasing decision on whether
But-
somebody's willing to,
Well, I just wanted to make a comment on it.
no, we appreciate it, and that's what tonight's for, so.
Right, was there any discussion or consideration to straightening roads or anything to relieve intersections or anything
We
like that?
did have a discussion, we've had some discussions with surrounding property owners.
Mm-hmm.
It's not looking feasible in terms of acquiring the appropriate property to make that work. So we have looked at some alternate options and also revisited our traffic study
Right.
and the surrounding intersections.
Okay,
Yes.
so it's still on the table, whether it's possible is a different story, is that
Yes.
correct? Okay,
Yes.
very good.
State Highway still has to review this and all, right?
Yes, absolutely. This
Yeah,
is
we'll
just
do
the
Right.
very, very first step of us being able to submit it
Hopefully
to
they'll look at
everybody
it
for
close.
comment.
Come back on the next level.
Right.
Just,
Tonight,
just-
you're not approving any of the traffic or any of the
Right.
parking, you're just saying,
Talking
yes,
about
we can
concept.
submit for
Right.
staff comment, so,
Right.
yes, absolutely.
when the preliminary plan is developed, assuming concept approval is granted, a preliminary plan will be developed by COSI. That plan will go to a number of review agencies, including State Highway Administration. Now, none of these units will be accessed directly from the state road. So their comments may be somewhat limited. They may have they may have pages of them, but because this project is not proposing to change any intersection or provide additional access onto the state road directly, they may not have a whole lot to say. So I don't want to set this expectation that State Highway is going to, shut the project down or put all these demands for deceleration lanes or things like that, because nothing's being proposed that's going to really touch the state road itself. I mean, as far as like driveways or, entrance into the parking lot, all of this is off of Westview Drive.
Now, is this a pass-through here? When we say Area B, is that actually pass through from Westview to the alley driveway that goes down to the other apartments? It kind of looks like it is. Yeah.
Yes, it is.
Okay, so it passes all the way through.
Then go to that next street.
Okay.
So that street is private right now, right? Or that driveway?
It's private. These internal parking areas, everything's private.
Right, but the alley that you're feeding onto over there is
That's
private.
That's private as well.
Okay, and you
That
have,
gentleman is in the audience here tonight.
Okay.
As an agreement with.
Would you like to make a comment, Mr. Herring, about that? Okay.
okay.
So do I have any other comments or questions?
Herring, 4259 Harney Road, Taneytown, and owner of one of the owners with my two brothers of the 16-unit apartment building there. And just to answer just a couple of questions or that have arisen. I certainly respect Mrs. Crawford's view as I deal with traffic myself, but my kids are the sixth generation. Since the 1800s, our families lived on Harney Road and made that trip. And when I get bogged down, it's the truck traffic. It's the George and Sons trucks and the trucks hitting 15 is the only time I really end up with, and I've traveled that road my entire life. That's the time when I get bogged down and get backed up in the morning. This is really when the trucks are trying to make a big left-hand turn to come to the square. So other than that, I really have not really had a problem. My family makes that trip every day, many times a day. And as far as carrying the groceries, if you look at some of our existing townhouses, like I own 422 Clover Court, which has no front street parking. It's way in the back. People are carrying their groceries at least that far now, if not farther, in our existing dwelling. So it's not unique to any place here. This is no different than anywhere else. If somebody doesn't want to make that trip or doesn't want to have one, immediate parking, they just don't live there. And yes, my dad and I own the lot that we're putting into the project. So we would have some easements to allow the traffic to flow between the properties without, so it will work for all of us. And also, if you ever drive by the Harney Road Apartments or the buildings on Frederick Street, those parking lots are not full. I don't know, Mr. Glass may be able to tell you, but our parking lots are just not full. And we have at least 2 spaces or
Mine can't be full, it's got 4 spaces to every unit.
what's that?
Mine's got 4 spaces to every unit.
Yeah, but ours I think is only 2, and they're still, you can drive through any time, any day, and there are plenty of openings. I think Mr. Reed could tell you my parking lot in the back hardly has any cars in it, a handful. So just some of the concerns that came up, I experienced those in my own day-to-day, so just to put my perspective on that.
Thank you. Are we ready to entertain a motion at this point, or how do we feel? Please come to the mic. State your name and address.
I'm Donna Haynes, 3253 Harney Road. I'm about 2 doors down from where the property will be. My big concerns also is with the traffic and what Mr. Herring was saying about the trucks. I think between Thomas Bennett Hunter and Feezer and Lehigh, they're constantly 24 hours a day up and down Harney Road. A lot of times there's 3 or 4 of them together. A lot of 18-wheelers use that road. A lot of campers as they're going up to Gettysburg. So I appreciate, the rush hour times, but pretty much, I would say almost 24 hours a day, we have heavy truck traffic. And then the campers, some pretty big ones that go up to Gettysburg. So I think we have to be really careful with judging the traffic on that, because there's a whole lot more that uses that than just the rush hour times. So, and it's concerning the trucks' speed all the time. And we've had police officers sitting out there even at the end of my driveway and trying to catch the traffic for that. But we've had animals, big dogs getting killed from the trucks. And it's a problem with traffic on that road now. So I'm hoping that if it does go through, we would have to have a light. We would have to have a better management of the speed that goes on down that road. So thank you.
Thank you.
Rosemary Orner, 808 Clubside Drive. I'm not sure the procedure. Are you voting now, or do we have other open conversation opportunity on other issues that we may have?
You'll have other opportunities, but we possibly will be voting or could be voting tonight on a concept. Again, this is just a concept. There'll be at least two more times when this will come before us.
May I make a comment other than traffic then? Is that appropriate?
Feel free, go ahead.
Okay. I'm a licensed realtor in the state of Maryland. Over 20 years, I've been licensed in 4 states. Resident of Carol Vista. I've been a resident in Taneytown for over 4 years. I'm very active in our local government and supporting our town. My question to you guys, what are you going to do for our town? What are you going to give us back for the area that you're going to create? That's my first question. My second question is with touring buyers, potential buyers. Personally, in my expertise, in my field, I'm concerned about ingress and egress of environmental perceptions, if you will. Coming from Harney Road into town, there's a perception, right or wrong, that there's a lower income, possibly community, subsidized. And I'm not against that, believe me at all. First perception. The second perception that was made by the other resident, the upper end by Kenny's, as you're coming into Grand Fairground, some of the area there that has been stigmatized, if you will, as a maybe a lower income or a subsidized, or whatever the right word is. I voice a concern as a real estate professional. What do I tell my buyers about the growth of Taneytown, a city that we're fighting for right now. We're in the midst of an election because we want to clean up Taneytown. We want to make this a proud town. I love where I live. I absolutely am passionate. And Jay, you just made reference that you see me on Facebook all the time. I'm not going to apologize for that because I believe in it. I bleed Taneytown. That's how I feel, gentlemen and madam. This is my home. I love my home. I am proud of my home. And I'm going to do everything with the elections coming up to hopefully bring in a mayor that we're going to make some major changes. We're going to have a streetscape that's going to be second to none.
Okay, thank you. Ma'am.
I just ask for the council to be very tenacious and concerning with your decisions on how else can we use a property like this to better our town. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Would anyone like to address that?
I'll address it just briefly. I know you've heard a lot of this before the BZA hearing, so I won't go into too much depth, but we do hope that the community will foster more of a community feel, for lack of a better word, and access walking distance and patronize the local businesses and offer something to a downtown community. There was a lot of testimony at BZA, and there was also part of our presentation to this commission before the BZA about the architectural features of this project. And I have to say, looking at other developments that Mr. Paxson and Ms. Zuniga, who was the one who testified here at the BZA hearing, this is going to be a very nice, very aesthetically appealing mix of units here. They really work hard, and I believe, I'm not sure if any of you attended the BZA hearing, but there was actually one BZA member who was familiar with another project that their property manager manages in Frederick and had nothing but incredible things to say about the level at which that property was maintained. So I think also keeping in mind in the background here that this is a property managed site offers a whole other level of maintenance and features to the community that just increase the aesthetic appeal and preserve it over time as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
There's still going to be a full-time manager, right?
Yes.
And we,
Okay,
I would just like to make one more comment, if I will, Mr. Parker. What I'm concerned about personally is property values. We want to increase our property values in Taneytown, not decrease our property values. Thank you.
not to be redundant, but if you have something different to add, please feel free to do that.
In a sense, yes. I just wanted to say the same thing. That is one of my concerns, is my property value. We bought a house when my husband was alive, and we worked hard at fixing it up. It is near that road, so that is one of my concerns, depending how things go. But I did have a question, I think more for Jim. Maybe he would know the answer to this, Mr. Weeprek. Is it normally for a state highway, really for a light to go up? Normally, is it normally if there's so many accidents, is that normally when that decision gets made, not when a project comes in? Am I wrong, or?
I'm certain that accidents do play a part in it, but I believe it's more driven by the intersection analysis, as the traffic consultant explained. They're going to look at the number of vehicles that go through the intersection, the wait time involved, things of that nature. I don't believe that the intersection at Harney and 140 is anywhere near the volume that would be required for state highway to really consider putting a light there. And again, as noted, people complain all the time about the wait time at the square here at 194 and 140, and that is actually functioning at an acceptable level of service. So I think we're a long way from the volumes that would trigger a light going at the intersection there.
That's what I was worried about. All right, thank you.
All right.
I'd like to have another comment. Will there be decks involved with any of these homes? No decks. No picnic tables sitting out back?
There's a dog park shown on there, and then there's also the community building as well, which is enclosed, but I don't, is there any?
Suppose I want to put a picnic table out back.
Okay, so there's typically,
How about back of my house?
What's that? If you want one in the back of your house, typically we allow that.
You,
As long as it's not, you know, as long as it's well kept and not offensive.
and that, Jeff, would be, first of all, that would be managed by the property manager.
okay.
And would that,
Yeah, I understand that.
and would that only be for the duplex units, or would that also be for
It would
the?
really only work for the duplex units, it wouldn't work for the apartments.
Yeah.
Can you clarify what is the front and what is the back of the duplex units?
Yes.
So, okay, these are the, wow, that's interesting.
You see what I mean?
Really interesting.
Because you'd think that what faces the road would be the front, except that they're
I'm
not.
Michael Blake with Mosley Architects.
Yes.
Everything facing the road is considered the front.
Okay.
Okay.
Even though they may not.
Where the park is.
So the
Right.
parking's in the rear.
So there is access to the duplexes, both from the front and the rear. From the front, there are porches, and that's really to respond to the Old Town
Right.
sign standards,
Mhm.
in keeping with that. But primary access for the residents
Will be in the rear, right. And while we're on that, this is still subject to the design board approval, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
All right, I'd still like to see if we can get a motion here on the floor. Well, guys, that we're here for a reason.
I'm just trying to make sure I don't have any more questions for them.
I'm going to abstain from the motions.
Excuse me?
I'm abstaining from the motion.
To get this to move forward, I'll make a motion, we approve the concept as presented to us this evening.
I'll second that.
Okay, now we'll have some further discussion if we would like. I haven't heard anything from the county, not to put Claire on the spot. Any comments?
That's safe. Good job.
Any other comments?
Do we have an approximate timeline? And if we do concept approval, when are we going to see this come back through? How quick do you want to start digging, I guess is my question. Right.
We'd be submitting the next plan at
60 to 90 days. Okay.
Yeah. And then that will go up for review and depend on.
Of course. Right.
And then we'd have the or we have the, yeah.
Right.
Okay. Jim or Jay, any comments before I call for the vote? Okay. The motion was made and second for approval of the concept plan as presented. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed?
Abstain.
Jim, did you get that? Okay, motion's passed. So we'll be seeing you again in a couple months. Traffic study, I'll try getting that on the main road on 140 at night. Sometimes you sit there too late, you still can't move.
That's very desirable.
I know.
That's very desirable.
I know. So I'm anxious to see what they come with next, but I won't be around to see it, so.
It's Carl Ebal and Larry Ellis. Who's on that? Jim? Who's on the appeals board? Carl Ebal, Larry?
Oh, gee, let me think.
Can't think of the other. There's a lady.
Ann, and then Edith
Kelso.
Kelsey. And who sits on the end? I can't remember who sits on the
Lee
end.
Hand still on
Yeah,
it? Lee Hand still on it?
Lee Hand is still on it, but some gentleman sits on the end. I can't see the name.
That cleared the room.
All right. Moving on, Jim. You want to go into your report?
Alrighty. Let's see.
Oop, I lost that.
All right, well, we've already dispatched with Taneytown Crossing, so little update on Maryland Compassionate Care and Wellness. Met with CDM Smith, our engineer, and BPR, the developer's engineer, earlier this month. Kind of nailed down their approach to be used for stormwater management. We did come to the realization that when ICEX used to occupy that property, they had planned for a second 20,000 square foot addition on the rear of the building that was never constructed. So their stormwater plan did accommodate the attenuation of the flow for that additional impervious area that was never built. That plan, however, was done under the old stormwater regulations, so there's still going to need to be some work done to bring it up to the current standards for water quality. So we can expect to see a preliminary plan in the next month or two. I think they're shooting for end of May, but we'll just have to wait and see if that comes to fruition or not. We did authorize a contingent start for interior renovations at the property. So the thinking was basically if they would have been able to put those HVAC units on the roof instead of out back, they really wouldn't even be doing a site plan. You know, if they could, as long as they can accommodate the additional parking on their existing lot by restriping or making it a little bit more of an efficient layout for parking. So with that in mind, and also knowing that we can put the brakes on it before they get any use and occupancy permit, we decided to let them go ahead and do the county calls it a contingency start for construction. They won't be able to get any inspections done though until everything else falls into place. So we're, as we often do, we're trying to be as accommodating for the businesses as we can by letting them get going while still having some level of protection in place for ourselves that, you know, they're not going to be able to start using the space until they get through all of the processes and they've paid their benefit assessment money and all that for the extra water that they're going to use. So the developer has also approached the city seeking relief from the water sewer benefit assessment fees, and that's still under some consideration. I think they're going to need to come back with some more compelling reasons than they presented at first, though, before the mayor and council may consider something like that. And thus far, it's only been discussed with the mayor and myself. It hasn't gone before council yet, and I don't know if the mayor is going to support that or not. So it may not get any farther than that. So so that's about it on compassionate care.
Could I ask one question there
Yes.
real quick? It's far outreaching, but has anyone ever approached these gentlemen or these people about the baseball field back there that we encroached on them and was hoping to get part
Yes.
of?
Yes, we have brought up that subject, and at this point, it sounds like they are willing to adjust that boundary line to help the city out when they actually own the property. Right now, Compassionate Care or Grassroots Cannabis is just the tenant. My understanding is that they have a buyout clause in their lease. I don't know how quickly that comes though, but their intent was to actually purchase the property from the current owner at some point.
They should.
So that's a conversation that we'll have again when the property actually changes hands.
We're still using it though, right?
Yeah, and it's not the field or the dugout. My understanding is does not actually encroach onto the 5300 Taneytown Pike property, but it's very close to the line,
Right.
so that effectively when people are milling around the dugouts and such, that they are wandering onto the adjacent property. So our stuff isn't really encroaching, but people
lot of
do
people
when
sitting
they're
on
out
it
there.
when they're watching the game.
Right. So, yes, so they are aware of that, and, you know, at first, you know, the first conversations about it, they've been willing to work with us on it, but it's not their property yet. So, something that was not in my report that just actually came up a day or so ago, NVR or Ryan Homes submitted a zoning certificate application for a, I guess, middle-sized house that was not one of the 4 that you saw elevations for previously. They're up there with the chairman right now. Maybe you can pass them back and forth a little bit. I just wanted to get any, I guess, consensus on that being acceptable, since it wasn't part of what was presented originally. And if anybody would like to get a refresher on some of the units, I do have the other ones that you have seen in the past. I can bring these up too, but
Pass that down. George can look at it too.
Well, they're only putting, what, 4 of them in there? Out of all of them? There's not gonna be very many of them, right? Of these?
these are
The originals.
the other units that you have seen
Yeah.
before, just to kind of give a little refresher of what they looked like. I didn't think the new one was a whole lot different looking than what you guys approved.
What did you say the name of that one was when I told you the size
Thanks,
was
Jim.
one different?
Craftsman style.
Craftsman style.
Yeah, and all of these are supposed to be within that craftsman style. But I feel like they're using that very liberally.
Yeah.
I would agree.
It just wasn't that pleasing to me.
So I'll move on just a little bit while you're kind
Okay.
of passing them around, but I know I noted in my report that we'd only had 2 new home zoning certificates as of this writing, but we've had like 6 more come in since then. So things, you know, both at Meadowbrook and Meads Crossing, you know, the pace has really picked up compared to what we've seen for quite a few years now. It's still not to the pace that they were putting them up when I first started in 2006, but it's definitely the fastest pace we've seen for quite a few years. You know, I think the norm for the last several years has been between 24 and 30, maybe 28 homes a year. And I think we're going to far surpass that this year at the rate we're going. So that's, I suppose, a good sign. And that's really all that I had to touch on for my report.
When does Ryan Holmes expect a decision from us regarding the new elevation?
They don't have any expectation at this point. So they just submitted the zoning certificate application without bringing the subject up. I noted that it was not a model that I remembered, so I went back and checked the file, and it was not one of the 4 Ryan single families that had been presented previously.
And you said this falls in the middle of the range size-wise?
Yes, they have, and I can't log into the shared drive tonight, but they have, their model names equate to the square footage of the homes, and there's like a 1290, this one's a 1440, there's a 1680, and then there's a 1910. So this is on the smaller end, but not the smallest. So it will be, I think, the smallest of the 2-story units. So the Rancher is a smaller amount of square footage. That one's in the 1200 range.
Now, do they intend on offering all of the elevation options that are in that packet?
Right, and that would be the different options that the buyers can choose from, yes.
Okay.
Any sales involved?
Hold on, George. You'll put this on the agenda for next month for us to vote on this, right?
If you'd like to wait a month, I can do that.
Yeah, because it
So-
wasn't on the agenda.
Okay, that is fine. I'll let them know that I have to park that one for a while.
On there now.
Pardon me?
It's on there now.
Okay.
Well, we'll be for
We'll
next
put it
month.
on for approval for next month.
Okay, George, sorry, I just want to
Any
catch you.
sales involved out there yet?
There have been a couple sales. I know they've sold
Any
a
UNOs?
townhouse. No.
No.
Temporary ones. The model homes have temporary UNOs because the pumping station has a temporary UNO. They still had some site work to do at the pumping station, so we didn't want to have houses having a full UNO while the pumping station was operating on a temporary.
You've got some
So-
sold signs on the townhouses.
Yeah, I've
got rear
just through the
doors, too.
grapevine heard
Yeah,
that
they
they
do.
have sold
Sliding
a
door, I
couple,
looked.
but they've not
Good
gone to
move.
settlement.
We brought up.
Yeah.
Okay. Is that it then, Jim?
Yep.
Jay?
Perfect timing.
Yeah.
So I was just talking to counsel out there because they are our, not co-counsel, but their firm represents the liquor store that's going into Sheets. And we all just got our notice that our hearing on the Sheets Board of Zoning Appeal, I keep calling it Sheets, but you realize it's the liquor store in the old Sheets. That's going to be held the second week of August, so that'll be heard then. And we were talking about the strategy because this is one of these cases where if we win, we lose. And what that means is if we're successful in winning in circuit court and upholding the Board of Zoning Appeals, what the people who are appealing it will do will appeal it to the Court of Special Appeals to drag it out even further, probably, which means we have to defend again the whole 9 yards. And, you know, the idea here is the longer they drag it out, you'll notice there's no action down here, that there possibly the people would lose the underlying sale of the contract, of the Sheets place. So that is what we're going to be doing this summer, is dealing with the appeal on that. And we'll see where it goes. She updated me that the liquor license issue related to that was granted, so that they were granted the transfer of the liquor license from the whiskey basket or whatever it was out here to here. So this is the only thing holding them up.
But they said it was grandfathered. That's why it was granted.
It was
I
grandfathered
was there. I was
because
watching.
it's already an existing license. And
Right.
so they're just transferring it from one spot in the tax district to another
To the
spot.
same tax district.
Yeah, and so as much as the argument is you have too many liquor stores, it's within the system. It's not a new liquor license. They bought someone else's, which, if you can imagine what we're dealing with, that is valuable since you can't get new ones based on population. So this isn't just going to go away. I mean, nobody's going to fold their tents here. The issue that, and you heard it then if you were there, is, you know, they're basically saying that the objections at the liquor board were basically over competition, which is what you heard here too. And so they granted the transfer. So that's going to be on our radar. The only other thing is that I wanted to tell you was the small cell legislation that you talked about, that passed the council and is now in effect. And it's no different than when before it passed, nobody's coming and knocking on our door to do it, but we met the deadline that the FCC put in place. We may want to make some changes going down the road, but there's no point in doing it until something's imminent. We have other priorities till then. So.
While you're on the sales tower, when does our approved minutes go to the commission, the city council? After they approved or as a draft?
After approved.
So our recommendation for the council to accept them never got to the council because it was the draft minutes of March. Is that
Right,
correct?
it never gets to them in writing the same month, but I believe either Mr. Wance or Jim or myself communicated that.
Okay, because I didn't hear, I listed both the work session and the regular, and I didn't hear where anything about the planning commission's recommendation went to them.
Prove it. Maybe we didn't say it that day.
Yeah, I don't think
But-
we did for that one.
I'm pretty sure you didn't. I listened to them twice, both of them twice.
Maybe there, and you see the time, I mean, it's not just with that, it's the timing for this is your approved minutes won't be approved until
To the following
agenda
month, and that's
package-
after the
right.
commission, after the council already meets.
Really, what we need to do is that the council liaison, Mr. Wance in this case, probably should have a report every meeting. As we, you know, it gets called on by the mayor, can you give me an update on the planning commission and what happened?
I'd like to see that on the
and-
agenda for the,
Well,
for,
in that case, in the case of the council right now, those reports don't come up until the end of the voting meeting. Now, in the case of this, and there was another time where I hadn't brought it up because it did not differ from the council. You know, the council was for this. Now, if the planning commission said otherwise, they were against it, I would tell the council, kind of caution them going forward. It's, this is what planning commission says, they may know something you don't. In this case, I didn't feel that it was making a difference because the feel of the council was that they were going forward with this.
But they directed it had to happen, that they
Right.
were going to do it for months.
So I felt
But-
that it was a little, understanding, yes, that the planning commission did give favorable, but it really didn't have a big bearing, so I didn't push that as a.
Well, I feel as our position here, if we make a motion and approve of something like that, it's worth mentioning to the city council.
Is it worth putting in the draft minutes? Just saying that they're draft and you can put a watermark on them saying these minutes are draft and subject to change or something?
It doesn't matter to me how it gets here, as long as the council is aware of what happens here at this commission before.
Right, but it should be timely.
It should be timely.
Right.
And we can change things up a little bit so that I include in my departmental report, I can include some notation of any votes taken at the commission meeting, something like that, so they'll see it along with the list of certificates issued, code enforcement statistics, and things like that. I can just add a quick, little short paragraph to my monthly report. That's not really a problem. So, unfortunately, the zoning department is obligated by code to provide certain reports to the mayor and council each month that differ from what all the other departments are required to report. So I have to give them a list of every certificate issued and things like that each month, even though, it's really not of any great importance to see, who put up a fence and who put on a deck or whatever for the mayor and council really, but that's a code-driven obligation, so that's just what my reports are.
Well, if it's worth our time to vote on it, it's worth
Give them
the
a
council
paragraph.
being aware of it.
I still like to examine the idea with Jim about trying to get the draft minutes out. A lot of places do that, and it says draft, so nobody's bound. But I know that he prepares the minutes, and they go out for, I
yeah.
get to look at them and say, hey, okay, they're right. Perhaps after that vetting, we make sure that happens in time to make it to the council package, so that your work is noted in a timely fashion.
Thanks.
For a while, we were doing that, but oftentimes the council packet deadline is within a couple days of the planning commission meeting.
Much like this week,
So
it's Wednesday.
Right. So it doesn't leave much time to get the minutes drafted, and especially tonight, since I couldn't access the drive on the computer. But we got away from that because we were just with this time crunch trying to get, a second set of eyes to look at them before we put it in the council packets, and it was we're just gonna go back and do it like everybody else does and give them the approved minutes, once they're approved, and not try to cram the draft minutes in that couple-day window. So I would opt to maybe start including some bullet points from the meeting or something.
Okay, thank you.
Highlights from the meeting that won't be, that'll be a lot easier to get included in the council packet just because of the timing for it.
Clara?
Let's see. The water and sewer master plan, the adopted version, is still for MD for review. The annual report will be before the county planning commission in May for approval, and the county planning commission is still working through the map changes for the comp rezoning. And then I think once the budget has been worked through with the county commissioners, we'll be holding sessions with them for pretty much adoption of the text and the map amendment for the first phase of the county comp rezoning.
Okay. Anyone else have any comments for us? Okay, George? Yes, sir. Okay, thank you. George?
Yeah, I have a comment. Jim, in our conversations with Souls. Do you know what's going to come up on traffic with that outfit out there?
I think it's
Pull
very,
out your crystal ball.
I think it's very interesting that we're fussing a good bit over 30
Yeah, 36
dwellings.
You're not talking about 35, 36 houses.
Right, when we have a 100-acre, 110-acre farm in our growth area that wants to annex.
Well, George, look at the good side. That's supposed to be for over 55,
It is?
right? Isn't that supposed to be a senior
Not all
area?
of them.
That's
Not
the
all of them.
current proposal.
Not all of them.
Not the one we have heard.
Okay.
Well, they may be before you in June, perhaps. I know they have a concept that they've worked up with an engineer and a builder, and they would like to present that in the next couple months. So you'll stay tuned. That'll be coming your way soon.
One thing further, Jim, I'm having a problem with townhouses being adjacent to residential areas with no common grounds between the properties. It's really a problem out there. If I put a fence up, and I might have to, they won't have access to the back of the property.
They mow the grass out there at Mead Crossing themselves. You can't put a fence up. They do the mowing.
He's referring to
Why
his
can't I put a fence up on my
Oh,
property?
you're talking about your property. I thought you was talking about Mead's.
I can
mind.
put a chain link fence up, and there'll be at least 5 houses right now that couldn't get into the back of their homes. Can't even walk back of them.
You wouldn't do that.
I'm gonna have to be a bad guy if it keeps up. They moved a big storage building in on house number 4. They couldn't get it in at an angle, so they set it on me and even dug out my surveyor's pin in the corner of my property. Dug out my surveyor's pin, which was on the corner of the property, put there by a surveyor. Now, they finally worked this building, this shed, which was way too big for the property, and it's sitting out there now, right on the line.
I take it Jim wasn't aware of a shed going in somewhere.
Making a note.
I'm sure you haven't, but don't create any problems now. I've met the people. I've met the people, and
George, you're on tape.
we're getting along. We're getting along.
George.
Trying to stir a pot without making it stick.
You got your name in front of you. All right.
You're gonna cause
Jim,
trouble with
Jim,
the
do
one
you have anything else, George?
I'm thinking of
Pertaining to the commission.
common grounds between properties.
Okay. Right.
I'd like to thank the commission for the last 4 years. This will be my last meeting as liaison to this commission, since my term on council will expire in 2 weeks. And regardless of what happens next Monday at the election, I'm not going to be your liaison. So I want to thank all of you for the last 4 years. I learned a ton. Hopefully I contributed a little bit to you. And thank you all for what I consider a good friendship and a good knowledge base. So thank you again.
All right, well,
Appreciate it.
Darryl,
Nothing, sir.
Ollie,
Nope, I'm good.
Jim? Okay, it looks like our next meeting is early. It's going to be
Okay, right, do we want to move it?
May the 20th,
Really?
Why the 20th?
because Memorial Day.
Well, I don't care. I won't be here.
We made it early so you can come.
You could be here regardless.
I might be here.
Yeah.
It's the day of the Meads Crossing ribbon
You
cut.
will be here regardless.
Yes, it is. That's true.
Did you know you were invited, right?
No.
No.
They sent an email that we were supposed to tell you.
yeah.
Tell-
Down here, we don't get emails, okay?
No, I don't think it's,
I'll send
The
something
big
out.
shots.
yeah. City council.
I just have one quick thing to add. following up on Jay's comments about the Taneytown liquors and the appeal, they do intend, because a stay was not requested as part of that appeal, they can move forward with opening the liquor store. So just in case that they have come in to do paperwork to get things going, I believe they've also gone to the county already to pull their tenant fit-out building permit for the property. So I don't know that you'll see anything before we meet again, but just in case you do, they're showing every indication that they're ready to move forward regardless of the status of the appeal. So just in case
People
you
in
do
there
see
tonight.
activity out there, it's
was
legit.
full
They've
tonight.
come in and done their paperwork and such. So just so we don't have another one of those situations where you guys notice things while you're out and about and it's like, oh, we didn't talk about that, or
Well, we get asked questions, and then we're kind of in the dark here.
right. So they're moving ahead regardless. So
Well, Brewery Fire was in the paper too
We were out there tonight working.
Brewery Fire was in the paper too for their passing of their license.
So, anything else? If not, I'll entertain a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Second? Okay, covered. All in favor?
Aye.
Carried, thank you. So sorry, Jeff.